Hello, and welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex, and I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this time with me today. This space we share is about more than just mastering the English language. It's about using language to better understand ourselves and the world we navigate every single day. We know that language and thought are woven together. So when we expand our vocabulary, we aren't just learning new words. We are discovering new ways to think, new perspectives to see from, and even new strategies to manage the quiet battles we all face. Today, we're going to explore a topic that touches every single one of us, regardless of where we're from, what language we first spoke, or the culture that shaped us. We are going to talk about three powerful emotions: frustration, stress, and depression. We'll learn to understand the subtle but crucial differences between them. And more importantly, we'll explore how we can begin to take back control when these feelings become overwhelming. Now, why is this conversation so incredibly important right now? Because we are living in a world that never seems to slow down. Just think about your own life for a moment. Everything moves at lightning speed. Technology evolves before we can even master the last update. Deadlines at work or school seem to get shorter and shorter. We live in a culture of instant replies, immediate results, and the unspoken expectation of constant productivity. It often feels like life has no pause button, no moment to simply breathe and catch up. And in the middle of this constant motion, this endless noise, our inner world can start to feel incredibly heavy. We might feel a surge of frustration when something small and insignificant goes wrong, like when a website takes too long to load, or we can't find our keys when we're already late. We might feel the weight of stress when all our responsibilities, at our job, in our studies, with our families, begin to pile up so high that we feel buried underneath them, unsure of where to even begin. And sometimes, if these feelings linger for too long, if they are left unattended, they can seep deeper into our being and become depression, which can feel like a heavy, gray cloud that follows us everywhere, blocking out the sun and making it difficult to remember what warmth even feels like. But here is the heart of the problem. So many of us confuse these three powerful emotions. We might use the words frustration and stress as if they mean the same thing. We might dismiss a long period of emptiness as just being sad. But if we don't truly understand what we are feeling, how can we possibly give ourselves the right kind of support? It's like trying to fix a car that won't start without knowing what the actual problem is. You could spend all day checking the tires, polishing the windows, and filling the tank with gas. But if the problem is really the engine, none of your efforts will make a difference. In the very same way, if we misdiagnose our emotional state, we might try solutions that don't address the real issue, leaving us feeling even more lost and hopeless than before. So, in our time together today, I want to guide you step by step. We will carefully unpack what each of these words truly means in the context of our daily lives. We will use real, relatable examples that feel familiar, not just sterile definitions from a textbook. And most importantly, I want this to be an invitation for you to reflect on your own journey, on your own experiences. This isn't just about me talking. It's about creating a space for you to think, to connect the dots in your own life. and perhaps to see yourself with more clarity and compassion in the stories we explore. Have you ever been so frustrated with a task that you just wanted to scream or give up entirely? Have you ever felt stress as a physical sensation, a tightness in your chest, or a knot in your stomach that just won't go away? Or have you ever suspected that the sadness you're feeling isn't just a fleeting mood, but something deeper, something more persistent and harder to shake off? These are the kinds of honest questions we will sit with together. My intention is not to make this episode feel heavy or somber. Quite the opposite. I hope it feels supportive, encouraging, and maybe even liberating. Because the moment you can accurately name your emotions, you take away their power to control you from the shadows. Understanding brings light. And when you can see your feelings clearly, you are no longer their prisoner. You become the one who can decide what to do next. You regain your sense of control. And when you feel in control, life starts to feel lighter, more manageable, and filled with a renewed sense of hope. That is the true purpose of our conversation today. So please, find a comfortable spot, take a slow, deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and get ready to join me on this important journey of understanding. Let's begin with frustration. Frustration is one of those universal human emotions that everyone knows intimately. Yet it can be tricky to put into words. At its core, frustration is the emotional response we have when we are blocked from achieving a goal. It's that agitated, restless feeling that arises when our efforts are not producing the results we want. Imagine you are trying to solve a puzzle. You have all the pieces in front of you, but no matter how many times you try, the last piece just won't fit. You turn it, you flip it, you try to force it, but the gap remains. That rising feeling of irritation, of being stuck, of a desire clashing with a reality that won't cooperate. That is the essence of frustration. It's not quite full-blown anger, and it's not sadness. It occupies a unique space in between. It is the emotional alarm that screams, "This is supposed to work. Why isn't it working?" In our modern lives, frustration can come at us from countless directions. One of the most common sources is traffic. You're on your way to an important meeting. Or maybe you're excited to get home after a long day, but you find yourself stuck in a sea of red tail lights. Cars inching forward at an agonizingly slow pace. You check the time on your phone. You tap your fingers restlessly on the steering wheel. You let out a heavy sigh. Then another. You are completely powerless to change the situation. And that feeling of being trapped, of your will being denied by external circumstances, creates a perfect storm for frustration. Technology, of course, is another major trigger. Let's be truly honest. How many times have you been in the middle of writing a crucial email or completing an important online application, only for your Wi-Fi to suddenly disconnect? The little icon spins and spins, a symbol of your blocked progress. You restart your router, you refresh the page, but nothing. Or perhaps your phone battery dies just as you're about to receive an important call, plunging you into an immediate state of disconnected annoyance. These are, in the grand scheme of things, very small problems, but in the moment, they can feel disproportionately upsetting because they abruptly halt our momentum and block our intentions. Frustration also emerges in more personal, more meaningful areas of our lives. Think about the experience of studying for weeks for an important exam. You sacrifice your free time. You review every chapter. You feel prepared. But when you get the results back, the grade is far lower than you expected. It doesn't seem to reflect the immense effort you invested. Or consider the journey of learning English. You spend hours practicing your pronunciation, memorizing vocabulary, and building sentences in your head. But when you find yourself in a real-life conversation with a native speaker, your mind suddenly goes blank. The words feel stuck in your throat, and the conversation feels awkward and difficult. These are setbacks. These are moments where the reality of the outcome does not match the hope and effort we put in. And it is in that gap, that space between what we deeply desire and what we actually get, that frustration builds and thrives. I vividly remember a time when I was trying to learn how to play a new song on the guitar. I had the sheet music. I watched tutorial videos online. I practiced the chords over and over again. My fingers felt clumsy and slow. I would play a few notes correctly, and then my hand would slip, creating a jarring, unpleasant sound. I tried for hours, but I just couldn't get the melody to flow smoothly. I felt this intense wave of frustration wash over me. I wanted to just put the guitar down, maybe even throw it against the wall. In that moment, it felt like a huge failure. All my effort seemed to be for nothing. That is frustration in action. You invest your time, your energy, your focus. You have a clear picture in your mind of the desired result. And when that result remains out of reach, you feel blocked, defeated, and deeply annoyed. Looking back on it now, I can smile at the memory. It was just a song. But that's the tricky nature of frustration. It has a way of magnifying small obstacles, making them feel like insurmountable mountains in the moment. What's truly fascinating about frustration is that it can act as a fork in the road. It can push us in one of two very different directions. On one hand, it can be a powerful motivator. It can light a fire under us, pushing us to try harder, to think more creatively, to find a different approach to solve the problem. For example, a writer who is frustrated by receiving rejection letters from publishers might use that feeling to fuel a complete revision of their manuscript, making it stronger and better than before. The frustration becomes the catalyst for improvement. On the other hand, frustration can be deeply discouraging. If a person faces the same obstacle again and again, and their efforts continually fail, the frustration can slowly curdle into a sense of hopelessness. They might start to believe that the goal is impossible, that they are not capable, and that trying is pointless. This is when frustration becomes dangerous, because it can pave the way for chronic stress or even depression down the line. It's the difference between thinking, "This is hard, but I'll find a way," and thinking, "This is impossible, so I give up." This is precisely why learning to recognize frustration in its early stages is such a vital skill. It is a completely normal, natural emotion. We will all feel it, but our response to it is what shapes our journey. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to simply name the feeling, to pause, take a breath, and say to yourself, "Okay, I am feeling frustrated right now." This simple act of labeling creates a small but crucial space between you and the emotion. It stops you from being completely consumed by it. In that moment of pause, you give yourself a choice. Do I need to push through this with more effort? Or do I need to step away, take a break, and come back with a fresh perspective? Frustration is also deeply tied to our expectations. The higher and more rigid our expectations, the more easily we will feel frustrated. Think about people who identify as perfectionists, those who believe that everything they do must be absolutely flawless. For a perfectionist, a tiny mistake is not just a tiny mistake. It feels like a catastrophic failure. This mindset is a recipe for chronic frustration because life, by its very nature, is imperfect. Things go wrong, plans change, people make mistakes. On the other hand, if you can cultivate a more flexible mindset, if you can learn to adjust your expectations and accept that bumps in the road are a normal part of any journey, you significantly reduce the power that frustration has over you. This doesn't mean you stop caring or you lower your standards. It simply means you give yourself and the world permission to be human. So let me ask you to reflect for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly frustrated? What was the situation? And more importantly, how did you react? Did you lash out? Did you shut down and give up? Or did you find a way to manage the feeling? To calm yourself down? And perhaps try again later? The way you handle these small, everyday frustrations often reveals a great deal about how you handle the bigger challenges in life. And always remember, frustration itself is not your enemy. It is a messenger. It's trying to tell you something important about what you value, what you want, and where you are feeling blocked. Once you learn to listen to the message, you can choose a response that serves you, instead of one that hurts you. Now, let's turn our attention to stress. Stress is another word that has become a constant presence in our daily vocabulary, but it's often misunderstood or used too casually. Stress is not the same as frustration. While frustration typically arises from a specific, identifiable obstacle blocking our path, like a broken printer or a missed train, stress is a much broader feeling of pressure and overwhelm. It's the sensation that you are being pulled in too many directions at once, that the demands placed upon you exceed your capacity to cope. If frustration is like being stuck in front of a locked door, stress is like being inside a room where the walls are slowly closing in on you. It's the feeling of carrying a heavy backpack that gets filled with more and more rocks with each new task or worry, until you feel like you might collapse under the weight. A crucial distinction to make is between short-term stress and long-term stress. Short-term stress, sometimes called acute stress, occurs when you are facing an immediate challenge or a deadline. For example, imagine you have a major presentation to give at work tomorrow. You spend the evening reviewing your slides, practicing your speech, and you can feel your heart beating a little faster. Your mind is sharp and focused. This is short-term stress. In situations like this, it can actually be beneficial. This type of stress, often called eustress, can give you a burst of energy and focus, pushing you to prepare thoroughly and perform at your best. A small amount of stress before an exam, a job interview, or a public performance can sharpen your senses and provide the motivation you need to rise to the occasion. However, the real danger begins when stress doesn't go away, when it becomes a chronic, long-term condition. Long-term stress happens when the pressures and demands of your life are relentless and ongoing. Perhaps you're in a job with an overwhelming workload. You have financial difficulties that never seem to ease. You're caring for a sick family member. Or you're dealing with a combination of all these things. Every single day feels like a battle, a marathon with no finish line in sight. When you are in this state, stress doesn't just affect your mind. It starts to take a serious toll on your body. You might experience persistent headaches, digestive issues, or trouble sleeping at night, waking up feeling just as tired as when you went to bed. Some people lose their appetite completely, while others might turn to food for comfort. Over an extended period, chronic stress can weaken your immune system, making you more susceptible to illnesses, and it can contribute to more serious health problems. Let's consider some common real-life examples. A university student might experience intense stress during their final exam period, not just because of one exam, but because they have to study for 4 or 5 different subjects simultaneously, all while trying to finish final papers and projects. A new parent might feel profound stress as they try to balance the demands of a newborn baby, a lack of sleep, their career, and maintaining their household. An employee in a toxic work environment might feel stressed because their boss is demanding and unpredictable, constantly sending emails after hours and creating a culture of fear. In all of these scenarios, the stress doesn't come from a single, isolated incident. It comes from a continuous, pervasive sense of being overwhelmed and having insufficient resources to meet the demands. What complicates our relationship with stress is how modern society often portrays it. In many professional cultures, being busy and stressed is almost worn as a badge of honor. People almost brag about how little sleep they got, how many hours they worked over the weekend, or how their schedule is packed from morning until night. You might hear someone say, "I'm so stressed. I have back-to-back meetings all day." But they say it with a hint of pride, as if their level of stress is a direct measure of their importance or success. Social media often amplifies this narrative. When you scroll through your feed and see a constant stream of people hustling, working late, and celebrating their lack of rest, it can create an internal pressure to do the same. It can make you feel lazy or guilty for taking a break or protecting your personal time. The unspoken message becomes dangerously clear. If you are not constantly busy and feeling at least a little bit stressed, you are not trying hard enough. But this way of thinking is a trap. Stress should never be a status symbol. It is not something to aspire to or admire. Stress is a signal from your body and your mind, a warning sign that you are under too much pressure. Ignoring that signal, or worse, celebrating it as a sign of strength, is a direct path to burnout and illness. There is a world of difference between being passionately engaged in your work and living in a constant state of high-alert stress. One builds you up. The other slowly breaks you down. It's also important to remember that stress is often invisible. Someone can appear perfectly calm and composed on the outside, smiling, meeting their deadlines, and engaging in conversation, while internally, they are feeling completely exhausted and overwhelmed. We cannot always see stress in others, and sometimes we are experts at hiding it from ourselves. We might say, "I'm fine, just a bit tired," when the reality is that we are drowning in pressure. That's why self-awareness is so crucial. You need to learn to recognize the early signs of stress in yourself. Ask yourself honestly, am I feeling a constant tension in my shoulders or my jaw? Am I always thinking about my to-do list, even when I'm supposed to be relaxing? Am I finding it difficult to enjoy the things that used to bring me happiness? If the answers are yes, then stress might be exerting more control over your life than you realize. The hopeful news is that stress, unlike deep-seated depression, is often manageable when you take proactive steps. Learning to prioritize your tasks, setting realistic boundaries, saying no when your plate is already full, and making time for healthy outlets like exercise, hobbies, or simply talking to a friend can all significantly reduce your stress levels. It doesn't mean your problems will magically vanish, but it creates breathing room. It gives you the space and energy you need to carry that heavy backpack a little more comfortably. So, the next time you feel that familiar sense of being overwhelmed, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this a short-term challenge that I need to focus on? Or has this feeling become a long-term, constant companion in my life? That simple question, that moment of reflection, can be the first step toward reclaiming your peace and well-being. Now, we arrive at depression, a word that is used so frequently in casual conversation, but whose true meaning is often deeply misunderstood. People might say, "I'm so depressed," after a bad day at work or when their favorite team loses a game. What they usually mean is, "I'm sad," or "I'm disappointed." But clinical depression is a state of being that is profoundly different and more serious. It is not about feeling down for a few hours or even a few days. It is a persistent and pervasive mental health condition that fundamentally alters the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you experience daily life. If frustration is like repeatedly hitting a solid wall, and stress is like carrying an impossibly heavy backpack, then depression is like trying to walk through a thick, cold fog. In this fog, everything appears gray, muted, and distant. The path forward is unclear, and it takes an enormous amount of energy just to take a single step. One of the most telling signs of depression is a profound loss of interest or pleasure in activities that once brought joy. This is a concept known as anhedonia. Imagine a person who used to love painting, spending hours lost in color and creativity. When depression takes hold, they might look at their canvas and feel nothing but emptiness. The desire, the spark, is gone. Or think of someone who loved spending weekends with their friends, laughing and sharing stories. Now, the thought of socializing feels exhausting, overwhelming. It's not that they don't care about their friends anymore. It's that the capacity to feel that joy has been temporarily stolen. It is as if the color has been drained from their world, leaving only shades of gray. Another hallmark of depression is a debilitating lack of energy and motivation. Waking up in the morning can feel like an impossible task, like trying to climb a steep mountain without any equipment. Simple, everyday activities that most people do without thinking, like taking a shower, preparing a meal, or answering a text message, can feel monumental and exhausting. Depression makes the ordinary weight of life feel 10 times heavier, almost too much to bear. The mind also undergoes a significant shift during a depressive episode. Negative thoughts become much louder, more persistent, and incredibly difficult to control. A person might find themselves trapped in a loop of self-criticism, thinking things like, "I'm a failure," "I'm worthless," "Nothing will ever get better," or "Why should I even bother trying?" This internal voice of self-doubt and hopelessness becomes a constant companion. Unlike stress, which is often triggered by external pressures like a heavy workload, depression is more of an internal condition. It changes the very lens through which you see yourself and the world around you. And what makes it so challenging is the persistence of these feelings. They don't just appear during a tough week. They remain day after day, for weeks, months, or even longer, creating a feeling of being trapped. It is absolutely crucial to understand that depression is not a character flaw. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not laziness. And it is certainly not something a person can just snap out of by thinking positively or trying harder. Depression is a legitimate medical condition, just as real as diabetes or heart disease. Our minds, just like our bodies, can become unwell. We would never blame someone for having a broken leg or catching pneumonia. And in the same way, we should never attach blame or shame to the experience of depression. In fact, telling someone to just cheer up is not only unhelpful, it can make the problem worse, deepening their sense of isolation and being misunderstood. What a person experiencing depression truly needs is compassion, patience, understanding, and support. Think about the stigma that still surrounds mental health in many societies. People are often encouraged to be strong, to hide their struggles, and to not be dramatic. They might hear phrases like, "You have so much to be grateful for," or "Other people have it much worse." While these statements might be well-intentioned, they can make the person suffering feel even more alone and invalidated. When you are in the fog of depression, you already feel disconnected from the world. Hearing that your deep, internal pain is not being taken seriously can make you withdraw even further. This is why open, honest conversations like the one we are having now are so vital. When we talk about depression without judgment, we help to break down the stigma. We make it easier for people to recognize their own struggles and to reach out for help. You might be asking yourself, how can I tell the difference between normal sadness and depression? This is an excellent and important question. Sadness is a normal human emotion that is usually tied to a specific event or cause. You might feel sad after an argument with a loved one, after losing a job, or after a disappointment. While sadness can be very painful, it is typically temporary. With time, and as the situation changes, the sadness begins to lift. Depression, on the other hand, often feels disconnected from any specific cause. It can linger and persist even when things in life seem to be going well on the surface. It affects nearly every aspect of your being, for an extended period of time. If you notice that you, or someone you know, has been experiencing feelings of hopelessness, emptiness, or a complete lack of motivation for more than 2 weeks, that is often a sign that it's more than just sadness, and it's time to pay attention. And here is the most important message I can share on this topic. If you suspect you might be experiencing depression, please remember that you do not have to endure this alone. Reaching out for help is a profound act of courage. Talking to someone you trust, Whether it's a close friend, a family member, a teacher, or a mental health professional, can make an enormous difference. Sometimes, the simple act of putting your feelings into words can release some of their power. For many, seeking professional support from a counselor, therapist, or doctor provides them with the right tools, strategies, and sometimes treatment to navigate their way out of the fog. Seeking help is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of incredible strength. It means you are taking your health seriously and taking the first step on the path to recovery. So let me gently reiterate. Depression is real, and it is serious. But it is also treatable. Recovery is possible, and life can, and does, become colorful and meaningful again. If you are not experiencing depression yourself, but you know someone who might be, the most powerful thing you can do is to offer your presence. Listen without judging. Offer your support without trying to fix them, and gently remind them that they are not alone, and that help is available. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, have I ever mistakenly dismissed my own or someone else's prolonged sadness? The more we learn to recognize depression for what it truly is, the better equipped we become to respond, to ourselves and to others, with the kindness, compassion, and care that is so deeply needed. When we examine frustration, stress, and depression as individual concepts, they can seem like distinct, separate experiences, and in many ways, they are. Each has its own unique feeling, its own triggers, and its own impact on our lives. But if we look closer, we begin to see that they are not isolated islands. They are deeply interconnected, like links in a chain. In fact, one can often lead directly to the next if it is not acknowledged and managed effectively. It's helpful to think of them as steps on a very slippery slope. If you're not paying attention, you can easily slide from the top to the bottom without even realizing how you got there. The journey down this slope often begins with frustration. It starts with a small, seemingly insignificant obstacle. Something blocks your path. Something doesn't go according to plan. And you feel that familiar sting of annoyance. Maybe you feel frustrated when you're trying to learn a new piece of software for work, and you keep making the same mistake. Maybe it's the frustration of trying to have a calm conversation with a family member, but it keeps turning into an argument. Or perhaps it's the daily frustration of practicing your English pronunciation, but still feeling like you sound unnatural. On their own, these moments of frustration are a normal and unavoidable part of being human. Everyone experiences them, but here is where the slope gets slippery. If these frustrations are not resolved, if they happen over and over again, and if we don't find a healthy way to process them, they begin to accumulate. They don't just disappear. They build up inside us like pressure in a container. When this unresolved frustration keeps piling up, it often transforms into chronic stress. Let's trace this path with an example. Imagine a young artist. Let's call her Chloe, who is passionate about her painting. At first, she feels frustrated when a particular painting doesn't turn out the way she envisioned it in her mind. I had a clear idea, but I can't seem to get it right on the canvas. This is a natural creative struggle. But then, she faces more frustrations. She struggles to sell her artwork. She receives critical feedback online, and she feels her progress is too slow. Now, her thoughts start to shift and broaden. It's no longer just about one painting. She starts thinking, what if I'm not a good enough artist? What if I never succeed? How will I pay my bills if I can't sell my work? Suddenly, the specific frustration of a single painting has morphed into a pervasive, ongoing stress about her entire career, her talent, and her future. Instead of facing one locked door, she now feels like the walls of her studio are closing in on her. This is how the slide accelerates. If Chloe doesn't find a way to manage this escalating stress, perhaps by connecting with other artists, focusing on the process rather than the outcome, or simply taking a break to recharge her creative spirit, the stress can continue its downward slide into depression. Day by day, she might find herself losing interest in painting altogether. The joy is gone. She might start to think, why do I even bother? Nothing I create is any good anyway. Her energy vanishes. The negative, self-critical voice in her head becomes deafening. And what started as a simple frustration with a single piece of art has now spiraled into a much deeper struggle with hopelessness and a loss of identity. We can observe this same dangerous pattern in almost any area of life. In a professional setting, an employee feels frustrated because their hard work is consistently overlooked for a promotion. Over time, this repeated frustration breeds a chronic stress about their value and future at the company. If this continues unaddressed for months or years, it can erode their self-worth and lead to depression, where they no longer feel motivated to even perform their basic job duties. In a relationship, one partner feels frustrated by a lack of communication. If that frustration is ignored again and again, it becomes a constant stress on the relationship itself. And without a change, it can eventually lead to depression rooted in feelings of loneliness and being unseen. The crucial takeaway here is that none of these emotional states exist in a vacuum. They are part of a potential chain reaction. Frustration is often the first warning signal. Stress is the louder, more insistent alarm. And depression can be the devastating consequence of ignoring those alarms for far too long. This doesn't mean that every single frustration will inevitably lead to depression. Of course not. Most of the time, we handle small frustrations and move on with our day. But it's when we consistently ignore them, suppress them, or tell ourselves it's not a big deal, that we allow them to fester and grow into something much larger and more difficult to manage. This is why developing emotional awareness is not just a nice idea. It's a fundamental act of self-preservation. Take a moment to think about your own life. Can you identify a pattern where you tend to ignore small frustrations until they snowball into a bigger problem? Do you have a tendency to tell yourself, "I'll just power through it," only to find yourself feeling completely drained and overwhelmed later on? Most of us have done this. It's a common human tendency. But when we can see this slippery connection clearly, we realize that addressing frustration in its early stages isn't just about solving a small annoyance. It's about protecting our long-term mental and emotional health. Imagine a small leak in the roof of a house. One drop of water seems harmless. But if the leak is ignored, that constant dripping can saturate the wood, cause mold to grow, and eventually compromise the entire structure of the roof. Frustration is that first drop. Stress is the spreading water stain on the ceiling. And depression is the potential structural damage that results from inaction. The sooner we patch the leak, the easier it is to prevent a much bigger disaster. So the question we must ask ourselves is, how do I respond to that first drop? Do I notice it? Do I pause to see where it's coming from and what it needs? Or do I just put a bucket under it and hope it goes away on its own? Being honest with yourself in answering this question is incredibly powerful. Because the slope only remains slippery if you choose to ignore the warning signs at the top. The moment you decide to pay attention, you can stop the slide before it even gathers momentum. When we discuss the heavy topics of frustration, stress, and even depression, it can be easy to feel a sense of helplessness. But here is the most empowering and hopeful truth. We are not merely passive victims of our emotions. These feelings are real, yes. They can be incredibly powerful. Absolutely. But the way we frame them, the perspective we choose to adopt, and the mindset we cultivate can make all the difference in the world. If frustration is the spark that can start a fire, and stress is the growing flame, then our mindset is the powerful tool we can use to contain those flames before they burn out of control. One of the most transformative mindset shifts we can make is the conscious decision to move from a mindset of perfectionism to one of progress. So many of us are trapped in the cage of perfectionism without even knowing it. Perfectionism is the relentless belief that everything we do must be flawless, that there is no room for mistakes, and that any outcome short of perfect is a failure. It sounds like a noble aspiration in theory, but in practice, it is a direct path to chronic frustration and anxiety. Why? Because life is inherently imperfect. The world is messy. No matter how meticulously you plan or how hard you work, there will always be unexpected challenges, unforeseen delays, and human errors. When a perfectionist encounters these completely normal bumps in the road, they don't see them as minor setbacks. They interpret them as a reflection of their own inadequacy, as proof that they are not smart enough, talented enough, or good enough. This way of thinking quickly leads to stress, corrosive self-doubt, and eventually, a feeling of hopelessness. A mindset focused on progress, on the other hand, changes the entire game. It's about shifting the central question from, "Am I perfect today?" to, "Am I a little better or a little more aware than I was yesterday?" This subtle shift in perspective is revolutionary. Let's apply this to the journey of learning English. If your goal is to speak English perfectly, without a single grammatical error or a hint of an accent, you will likely feel frustrated almost immediately. You might even become afraid to speak at all, paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. But if your goal is simply to make progress, to improve step by step, then every single conversation, even the awkward ones filled with mistakes, becomes a victory. Mistakes are no longer signs of failure. They are evidence that you are trying, that you are learning, that you are growing. And trying is the only way forward. Consistency is another pillar of a healthy mindset. We often fall into the trap of expecting monumental results from a short burst of intense effort. We go to the gym for one weekend and expect to be fit. We study English for 1 week and expect to be fluent. When these unrealistic expectations are not met, frustration sets in. But the profound truth is that meaningful, lasting change rarely comes from a single, heroic effort. It comes from small, seemingly insignificant actions repeated consistently over time. There's a beautiful analogy of a single drop of water falling on a large stone. One drop makes no visible change. But if that drop falls in the same spot, again and again, day after day, over years, it will eventually wear a hole in the stone. That is the incredible power of consistency. If you commit to reading just one page of an English book every day, if you write a few sentences in a journal each night, if you practice speaking for just 10 minutes on a regular basis, the cumulative effect over time will be astonishing. This leads us to the importance of setting realistic goals. Unrealistic goals are a form of self-sabotage. If you tell yourself, "I will study English for 4 hours every single day," but your busy life only allows for 45 minutes, you will end each day feeling like a failure, even though 45 minutes of daily study is a fantastic achievement. A realistic goal would be, "My aim is to study for 30 minutes each day, and anything more than that is a wonderful bonus." By setting achievable goals that align with your actual life and energy levels, you create more opportunities for yourself to succeed. And every small success builds confidence. Confidence, in turn, reduces stress and makes the journey enjoyable. It's also vital to understand that cultivating a positive mindset does not mean ignoring problems or engaging in toxic positivity. It is not about pretending everything is fine when it isn't. A healthy mindset is about acknowledging reality and then choosing a constructive and compassionate way to respond to that reality. For instance, if you receive critical feedback on a project at work, the perfectionist mindset might say, "I'm a failure. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent." The progress mindset, however, would say, "This feedback is difficult to hear, but it contains valuable information. What can I learn from this to improve next time?" One mindset slams the door shut on growth. The other opens it wide. Finally, sometimes the most powerful way to take control is to understand the strategic importance of rest. We are immersed in a culture that often glorifies being constantly on, working late, studying until dawn, always pushing forward. But rest is not the opposite of productivity. It is a crucial component of it. Rest is not a sign of laziness, it is an act of wisdom. Just as our muscles need time to recover and grow stronger after a workout, our minds need periods of rest to process information, consolidate memories, and heal from mental and emotional exertion. Giving yourself permission to pause, to disconnect, to do nothing, is not a weakness. It is an essential strategy for long-term resilience and well-being. So, as you reflect on your own life, I invite you to ask yourself these questions. What is the dominant mindset I operate from right now? Do I demand an impossible standard of perfection from myself? Do I view mistakes as signs of failure or as opportunities for learning? Are the goals I set for myself realistic and kind? Or are they setting me up for disappointment? And most importantly, am I truly honoring my need for rest? Or am I running on empty? The truth is, you cannot always control the external events of your life, but you almost always have control over the perspective you bring to them. And when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at truly begin to change. That is the quiet, incredible power of your mindset. As we talk about these significant emotional challenges, it's easy to assume that the solutions must also be large, complex, and difficult. But the beautiful reality is that many of the most effective strategies for change are found in small, simple habits that we can weave into our daily lives. These habits are like a toolkit we can carry with us everywhere. We may not have the power to eliminate every problem or every source of pressure from our lives, but with the right tools, we can learn to navigate these challenges with greater resilience, calm, and grace. The wonderful news is that these tools are accessible to everyone, regardless of your circumstances. One of the most potent and yet most overlooked tools is something we all do every moment of every day: breathing. It may sound almost too simple to be effective, but consciously learning how to use your breath is one of the quickest ways to calm your nervous system. When we feel frustrated, anxious, or stressed, our breathing pattern automatically changes. It becomes shallow, rapid, and centered in our chest. This type of breathing sends a signal to our brain that we are in danger, which in turn releases more stress hormones, creating a vicious cycle. By intentionally slowing down, taking deep belly breaths, and focusing your attention on the sensation of the air moving in and out of your body, you send a powerful countersignal to your brain. It's a message that says, "It's okay. I am safe. I can relax." A simple technique like box breathing, where you inhale slowly for a count of 4, hold your breath for 4, exhale slowly for 4, and then hold for 4, can dramatically reduce physical and mental tension in just a minute or two. This is a tool you can use anywhere: at your desk before a difficult meeting, in your car when stuck in traffic, or at home when you feel overwhelmed. Another incredibly helpful tool is journaling. In our digital age, the simple act of writing your thoughts down on paper might seem old-fashioned, but its benefits are profound. When we are feeling overwhelmed, our minds can feel like a cluttered, messy room, with anxious thoughts bouncing around chaotically. Journaling is like the process of tidying that room. When you transfer your thoughts from your head onto the page, you give them structure and order. You externalize them, which creates a bit of distance and perspective. You might discover that a worry that seemed enormous in your mind looks much more manageable when written down. Or you might start to notice patterns in your feelings. For example, realizing that you feel most stressed on Sunday evenings as you think about the week ahead. Some people find it helpful to use their journal to write down 3 things they are grateful for each night. This simple practice, known as a gratitude journal, helps to train the brain to actively look for the positive in life, even on difficult days. Exercise, or what I prefer to call movement, is another tool that is often underestimated for its mental health benefits. Many people associate exercise purely with physical goals, like losing weight or building muscle. But in reality, movement is one of the most powerful natural antidepressants and anti-anxiety remedies available to us. When we move our bodies, whether it's through a brisk walk, dancing in our living room, swimming, or yoga, our brain releases endorphins and other neurochemicals that naturally elevate our mood and reduce stress. Think of movement as a way to press the reset button on your emotional state. You don't need an expensive gym membership. A simple 20-minute walk in a local park, paying attention to the trees, the sky, and the sounds around you, can be enough to clear your head and shift your entire perspective. Healthy, supportive conversations are also an essential tool. When we are struggling, our natural instinct can sometimes be to withdraw, to hide our feelings and isolate ourselves. But connection is a fundamental human need, and talking to a trusted friend, a supportive family member, or a mentor can be incredibly healing. Sharing your feelings out loud can make them feel less heavy and less frightening. It reminds you that you are not alone in your struggles. And sometimes, simply hearing another person's perspective can help you see solutions or possibilities that you couldn't see on your own. Words can build bridges, connecting us to the support and understanding we need. Finally, the power of routine cannot be overstated in maintaining emotional balance. So much of life is unpredictable and uncertain, and a consistent routine can provide a sense of stability and grounding. Something as simple as waking up at the same time each morning, making your bed, having a quiet cup of tea before you start your day, or reading a few pages of a book before you sleep can create anchors in your day. These small, predictable rituals build a structure that makes it easier to handle the unexpected challenges that arise. You can think of your routines as invisible walls that protect your time and energy. Without them, it's easier for the chaos of the world to rush in. With them, you have a safe, predictable space to recharge and reset. It's fascinating to see how different cultures have integrated these tools into their way of life. For instance, the practice of meditation, which is a form of breath and mind training, is a daily habit in many Eastern cultures. In Japan, the concept of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, encourages people to spend quiet, mindful time in nature to reduce stress. In many European cultures, taking a proper lunch break away from your desk is a protected and valued part of the workday. These examples show us that there is no single right way to build a healthy life. The best tool is the one that resonates with you and that you can practice consistently. What's most important to remember is that you don't have to implement all of these changes at once. That would be overwhelming. The key is to start small. Choose just one tool that feels accessible to you right now. Maybe it's the box breathing. Maybe it's a 5-minute walk. Maybe it's writing one sentence in a journal. Practice that one small thing consistently. Over time, these small steps compound. They build on each other, creating a foundation of emotional strength and resilience that can support you through life's inevitable storms. Now that we have journeyed through the landscapes of frustration, stress, and depression, and explored some of the practical tools that can help us navigate them, I want to gently slow down our pace. I want to speak directly to you, the person listening to my voice right now. This is the part of our conversation where I invite you to shift from being a passive listener to an active reflector. Because true, lasting change doesn't come from simply accumulating information or hearing good advice. It comes from the quiet, honest moments when we turn inward, ask ourselves important questions, and make small, conscious decisions to change our own behavior. So, my first question for you is this: what is one small, manageable habit you can introduce into your life today? Not tomorrow. Not next week when you're less busy. Not next month. Today. It doesn't need to be a grand, life-altering gesture. In fact, the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest steps. Because small steps are achievable, and achievement builds momentum. Perhaps your small step is to decide that every afternoon you will get up from your desk and take a 10-minute walk without your phone. Maybe it's the decision to turn off all screens 30 minutes before you go to bed, to give your mind a chance to unwind. Perhaps you could commit to writing just one sentence in a journal each night, capturing a single thought or feeling from the day. Or maybe the habit you choose is as simple as pausing to take 3 slow, deep breaths before you react to a stressful email or a frustrating comment. These actions may seem insignificant from the outside, but their internal impact is profound. With each small act of self-care, you are sending a powerful message to yourself. A message that says, I am worthy of care. I am taking responsibility for my well-being. I am in control of my choices. Here's another question for you to ponder. What is one tiny action you could take that would reduce your stress level right now, in this very moment, or in the next hour? Take a second to scan your current day or your upcoming week in your mind. Where do you feel the most pressure? Where does that tension reside in your body? Picture one specific situation that typically makes you feel stressed. Now, ask yourself, what is one very small thing I could do differently in that situation? It could be a physical action, like stretching your shoulders. It could be a mental action, like changing the self-critical voice in your head to a kinder, more encouraging one. Or it could be the simple act of giving yourself permission to step away for 5 minutes. We often believe that reducing stress requires changing the entire external situation. But more often than not, it begins with changing our internal reaction to it. As you engage in this reflection, I want to encourage you to practice noticing your emotions with a sense of gentle curiosity, rather than harsh judgment. All too often, we label our feelings as good or bad. We feel a wave of frustration, and our immediate thought is, "This is wrong. I shouldn't be feeling this way." We feel the weight of stress, and we tell ourselves, "I'm weak for not being able to handle this." We feel a deep sadness, and we believe, "I'm failing at being happy." But your emotions are not your enemies. They are simply messengers. They are signals, like the traffic lights on a busy street. A red light doesn't mean your car is broken. It's just a signal to pause, to pay attention before you proceed. In the same way, when you feel frustration, stress, or sadness, it is not a sign that you are broken. It is a signal from your inner world that something in your life requires your attention. Consistency, as we've discussed, is the magic ingredient here. Taking care of your emotional well-being is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice, much like brushing your teeth. You don't do it just once and expect your teeth to remain healthy for the rest of your life. You do it every single day because you understand that small, consistent actions are what create long-term health. The same is true for your mind and your heart. The small, regular practices of breathing, journaling, moving your body, and connecting with others are what build emotional resilience over time, not a single, grand effort. And with consistency comes the need for patience. We live in a world that worships speed and instant gratification. We want quick fixes and overnight transformations. But emotional and mental growth simply does not work that way. Think of it again like your English learning journey. You don't become fluent in a week. You learn a new word. You practice a new grammar structure. You have one conversation, then another. It is a slow, gradual process. The same is true for learning to manage difficult emotions. Progress is not always a straight line, and it's often not immediately visible. But with patience and persistent effort, it will come. So, I want to leave you with this final encouragement. Please, do not underestimate the immense power of your own small, consistent steps. Even if you feel like you are moving at a snail's pace, remember that slow progress is still progress. Be kind to yourself on this journey. Notice your emotions without judging them. And celebrate your small victories. Celebrate the one time you chose to pause and breathe instead of reacting in anger. Celebrate the evening you decided to write down your feelings instead of bottling them up. These small wins matter more than you know. They are the building blocks of a more peaceful and resilient life. As you listen to my voice right now, perhaps you can pause for just a moment and answer this silently. What is one small thing I can do for myself today that will bring me a little more peace? And if that question feels too big, make it even smaller. What can I do in the next 10 minutes? That is how real change begins, not with giant leaps, but with one mindful, intentional step at a time. As we bring this episode of English in Fluency to a close, let's take one final moment to gather the threads of our conversation. We have traveled through the distinct emotional territories of frustration, stress, and depression. It is so important to hold on to the understanding that each of these experiences is unique. Frustration is that sharp, immediate feeling of being blocked when things don't go our way. Stress is the heavier, more pervasive feeling of being overwhelmed by too many pressures at once. And depression is a deeper, more persistent state that can drain the color from our world, affecting our energy, our interests, and our very perception of ourselves. Recognizing the differences between these states is the first, most critical step toward regaining control. Because you cannot effectively manage something that you do not clearly understand. The central message, the one idea I hope you carry with you long after this episode ends, is this: you are not defined by your emotions, and you do not have to be controlled by them. Life will inevitably present you with challenges, with unexpected turns, and with moments that test your very limits. You will feel frustrated. You will feel stressed. You will feel sad. These are all part of the rich tapestry of the human experience. But you are not powerless. By cultivating awareness, by taking the time to reflect on your feelings, and by consistently using practical tools like conscious breathing, journaling, movement, and human connection, you can learn to respond to life's challenges in a healthier, more empowered way. You can choose how to think, how to act, and how to care for yourself, even and especially when life feels hard. This journey is not about trying to eliminate difficult emotions. That's an impossible goal. It's about learning to listen to them, understanding the messages they carry, and then making conscious choices that support your overall well-being. I also want to leave you with a profound sense of your own capacity for change. No matter where you find yourself on your journey today, no matter how heavy your heart or how cluttered your mind may feel, please know that change is always possible. It rarely happens overnight, but it absolutely happens through the cumulative power of small, consistent actions over time. Think one last time about your English studies. No one becomes fluent in a day. It's the daily practice. Each new word learned, each conversation attempted, each mistake made and learned from, that ultimately leads to fluency. The very same principle applies to your emotional health. Every time you choose to pause and breathe, instead of reacting impulsively, every time you take a few minutes to write down your thoughts, every time you choose a short walk over scrolling on your phone, you are laying another brick in the foundation of your own resilience, your own strength, and your own self-awareness. These small steps are not small at all. They are everything. So, here is my final, gentle call to action for you. Take a moment right now to reflect on your own daily habits. What is one small, tangible action you can commit to starting today, to better care for your mind and heart? Perhaps it's 5 minutes of quiet breathing each morning. Perhaps it's a short walk during your lunch break. Or perhaps it's simply writing down one thing you are grateful for before you go to sleep. If this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with a friend or a family member who might also find value in this conversation. Opening up dialogues about mental and emotional well-being helps to break down stigma and reminds us all that we are not alone. And, of course, I warmly invite you to subscribe and come back for our next episode of English in Fluency, where we will continue to explore meaningful topics together, growing our language skills and our life skills side by side. Remember, every small step you take truly counts. You are not alone on this path. You have within you the power to take control, to make positive changes, and to cultivate a healthier, more compassionate relationship with your own emotions. Be patient with yourself, stay consistent in your efforts, and believe in your incredible capacity to grow. Life will always bring its storms, but with awareness, action, and self-care, you can learn to navigate them with ever-increasing strength, confidence, and peace. Until next time, take wonderful care of your mind, your heart, and your words. Thank you for sharing this time with me here on English in Fluency, a place where language meets life, where reflection meets action, and where your journey is always honored. Take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.